The rain was coming down hard that evening, turning the streets of Chicago into a maze of shimmering reflections under the dim glow of streetlights. Laura Bennett pulled her thin jacket tighter around herself as she hurried along the sidewalk, her worn-out sneakers splashing through puddles she couldn't avoid. It had been another long shift at St. Mary's Hospital, and all she wanted now was to get home, take off her damp clothes, and maybe warm up with a cup of tea if she could find anything left in her almost empty pantry. Laura wasn't the kind of person who complained much. She had learned early on in life that complaining didn't fix anything, especially when you were struggling to make ends meet. At 28 years old, she worked tirelessly as a nurse, often picking up extra shifts just to keep ahead of her mounting bills. Between student loans, rent for her tiny apartment, and the occasional medical emergency involving her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, money always seemed to slip through her fingers no matter how hard she tried to hold on to it. Still, despite her financial struggles, Laura carried a quiet strength within her, a determination to help others even when she herself needed help. Her co-workers admired her for this quality, though they sometimes teased her about being too generous for her own good. "You'll give away your last dollar one day," they'd say with affectionate smiles. Laura would laugh it off, but deep down she knew there was truth in their words. Helping people wasn't just something she did, it was who she was. On this particular night, however, fate seemed intent on testing her resolve. As Laura turned down an alley shortcut toward her apartment building, she noticed something, or rather someone, huddled against the brick wall near a stack of soggy cardboard boxes. At first glance, she thought it might be a pile of discarded trash, but then she saw movement. A man sat slumped there, his head bowed low, his shoulders shaking slightly as if he were either cold or crying, or perhaps both. For a moment, Laura hesitated. The alley wasn't well lit, and late-night encounters like this rarely ended well in stories she'd heard or seen on the news. But curiosity mingled with concern tugged at her heartstrings. Taking a cautious step closer, she called out softly, "Are you okay?" The man didn't respond immediately. He lifted his head slowly, revealing a face weathered by hardship, yet somehow still retaining traces of dignity. His hair was matted, his beard unkempt, and his clothes, what little remained of them, were soaked and torn. Despite his disheveled appearance, there was an air of quiet composure about him, as though he hadn't always lived like this. "I'm fine," he muttered after a pause, his voice rough from lack of use. "Just resting." Laura frowned. Resting? In this freezing rain? Something about his answer didn't sit right with her. Kneeling beside him, she introduced herself. "I'm Laura. Are you sure you're okay? You don't look so good." The man studied her for a moment before sighing heavily. "Name's Daniel," he said finally, his tone guarded but not unkind. "And I suppose I've looked better." His admission made Laura's chest tighten. She couldn't just walk away now, not when he clearly needed help. Glancing around, she spotted a small cafe at the end of the alley. Its neon sign flickered faintly in the rain, casting a warm orange glow onto the wet pavement. "Come on," she said firmly, extending a hand. "Let's get you out of this weather. I'll buy you something warm to eat." Daniel hesitated, eyeing her skeptically. "Why are you doing this?" he asked bluntly. "You don't know me." Laura shrugged, offering him a small smile. "Because it's the right thing to do. Besides, everyone deserves a little kindness, don't they?" Her words seemed to strike a chord with him. After a brief pause, he nodded reluctantly and allowed her to help him to his feet. Together they trudged through the rain toward the cafe, its warmth beckoning them like a beacon in the storm. Inside, the atmosphere was cozy and inviting, a stark contrast to the dreary world outside. Laura shook off her umbrella and guided Daniel to a booth near the window. Once seated, she ordered 2 bowls of soup and some bread, insisting that he choose whatever he liked. Daniel glanced at the menu briefly before settling on a simple sandwich and coffee. As they waited for their food, Laura tried to make conversation. "So, Daniel, how long have you been, She trailed off awkwardly, unsure how to phrase her question without sounding judgmental. Out here? He finished for her, his lips curving into a wry smile. A few weeks, maybe longer. Time tends to blur together when you're living on the streets. Laura nodded sympathetically. What happened? If you don't mind me asking. Daniel leaned back in his seat, his gaze distant as if recalling memories he'd rather forget. Bad luck, mostly. Lost my job, then my apartment. Things spiraled pretty quickly after that. But hey, he forced a shrug. Life happens, right? His casual tone belied the pain behind his words. Laura felt a pang of sadness for him, imagining what it must feel like to lose everything you once held dear. Still, she admired his resilience. Many people in his position might have given up entirely, but Daniel carried himself with a quiet strength that hinted at a deeper story. When their food arrived, Daniel ate hungrily, savoring each bite as though it were his first meal in days. Watching him, Laura couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude for the things she often took for granted. A roof over her head, steady income, even if it barely covered her expenses, and the ability to lend a helping hand when needed. So Laura, Daniel said between mouthfuls, breaking the silence, what's your story? Why does someone like you care so much about strangers? Laura blinked, caught off guard by the question. Shrugging modestly, she replied, I guess I've always believed we're supposed to look out for each other. My mom used to say that kindness is the only thing that keeps the world spinning. And honestly, she paused, considering her next words carefully. I think helping others reminds me why I became a nurse in the first place. To make a difference, however small. Daniel regarded her thoughtfully, his expression unreadable. That's admirable, he said simply. Not many people would stop for someone like me. Well, maybe more should, Laura countered with a soft smile. We're all just trying to survive, aren't we? Their conversation flowed naturally after that, touching on topics ranging from Laura's passion for healthcare reform to Daniel's vague musings about starting over somewhere new. Though he revealed little about his past, Laura sensed that beneath his guarded exterior lay a man burdened by regret, yet yearning for redemption. By the time they finished eating, the rain had eased into a gentle drizzle. Outside, the city buzzed, with renewed energy as pedestrians braved the damp streets. Laura glanced at her watch and sighed. I should probably get going. Work calls again bright and early tomorrow. Daniel nodded, standing alongside her. Thank you, Laura, for everything. I won't forget this. There's no need to thank me, she replied sincerely. Just promise me one thing. What's that? That if you ever find yourself in a position to help someone else, you'll pay it forward. He smiled faintly, a glimmer of hope lighting up his weary eyes. I promise. With that, they parted ways, each carrying a sense of connection forged in the most unlikely of circumstances. As Laura walked home, she couldn't shake the feeling that meeting Daniel had been no mere coincidence. Little did she know, their paths were destined to cross again, and when they did, her life would change forever. Over the next few days, Laura found herself thinking about Daniel more often than she expected. It wasn't just his ragged appearance or the sadness in his eyes that lingered in her mind. It was the way he carried himself, the quiet dignity that seemed so at odds with his current situation. She wondered what had brought him to such a low point and whether he'd managed to find shelter after their encounter. On her way home from work one evening, Laura decided to stop by the cafe, where they'd shared dinner. She didn't know why exactly. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe she hoped to see him again. As she pushed open the door, the familiar warmth of the cafe enveloped her, but there was no sign of Daniel. Instead, she struck up a conversation with the barista, a friendly young woman named Mia. Hey, have you seen that guy I was here with a couple nights ago? Tall, scruffy beard, looked like he'd been through some tough times, Laura asked casually. Mia tilted her head, trying to recall. Oh yeah, the guy who ordered the sandwich and coffee, right? He came back yesterday, actually. Said he was looking for you. Laura's heart skipped a beat. Really? Did he say anything else? Not much, Mia admitted with a shrug. Just that he owed you something and wanted to thank you properly. Seemed pretty serious about it, though. The news left Laura feeling both curious and uneasy. What could Daniel possibly owe her? All she'd done was buy him a meal and lend an ear. Still, the thought of seeing him again stirred something inside her, a mix of concern and anticipation she couldn't quite explain. The very next day, as Laura walked home from another exhausting shift, she spotted Daniel sitting on a bench near the park. His clothes were still worn, but he looked slightly less disheveled than before, as if he'd made an effort to clean up. When he saw her approaching, he stood up quickly, his expression unreadable. "Laura," he said, his voice tinged with relief. "I've been hoping to run into you." She smiled warmly, though a part of her remained cautious. "Hi, Daniel. How are you holding up?" "I'm better," he replied hesitantly. "Thanks to you." Before Laura could respond, Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He held it out to her, his hand trembling slightly. "This is for you." Confused, Laura took the paper and unfolded it. Her eyes widened as she realized what it was: a check signed in neat handwriting for $50,000. Beneath the amount was a short note. "For your kindness. Use it wisely." "What is this?" Laura stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you give me this?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. "You helped me when I had nothing. This is my way of saying thank you. Please, don't try to give it back, I insist." Laura shook her head firmly, thrusting the check toward him. "No, I can't accept this. You need it more than I do. I didn't do anything special. I just bought you dinner." "You did more than you know," Daniel countered, his tone softening. "That night you reminded me of what really matters. People like you. You restore faith in humanity. Trust me, I can afford it." His words only deepened Laura's confusion. "Afford it?" "Daniel, how—" But before she could finish, Daniel raised a hand to silence her. "Let's leave it at that, okay? Just promise me one thing. Use the money to help others. That's all I ask." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Laura standing there, clutching the check in stunned silence. For a moment she considered chasing after him, demanding answers, but something in his demeanor told her it wouldn't do any good. Whatever secrets Daniel was hiding, he clearly wasn't ready to share them. Back at her apartment, Laura sat at the kitchen table, staring at the check as if it might disappear if she looked away. $50,000. It was more money than she'd ever dreamed of having, yet it felt tainted somehow. Who was Daniel really? How could someone living on the streets afford to write such a generous check? Despite her reservations, Laura knew she couldn't ignore the opportunity staring her in the face. For years, she dreamed of opening a free clinic to serve underprivileged families in Chicago, people who fell through the cracks of the healthcare system. With this money, she could finally make that dream a reality. The decision didn't come easily. Laura spent hours pacing her tiny apartment, weighing the pros and cons. On one hand, accepting the money felt wrong, like taking advantage of someone in need. On the other hand, turning it down meant letting pride stand in the way of helping countless others. Finally, she resolved to honor Daniel's request, to use the money wisely and selflessly, just as he'd intended. In the weeks that followed, Laura threw herself into planning her clinic. She scoured listings for affordable spaces, negotiated deals with suppliers, and reached out to colleagues willing to volunteer their time. The process was grueling, but every step forward filled her with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, Daniel remained absent from her life. Though she searched for him around the city, asking questions at shelters and soup kitchens, no one seemed to know where he'd gone. It was as if he'd vanished without a trace. Unbeknownst to Laura, Daniel was watching her progress from afar. From the comfort of his penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, he monitored news articles and social media posts about her efforts to establish the clinic. Each update brought him a strange mixture of pride and guilt. Pride because Laura was using his gift exactly as he'd hoped, to help others. Guilt because he'd deceived her, hiding behind a false identity to test the limits of human kindness. Daniel's Experiment had started months earlier, long before he met Laura. After losing everything once before, a bitter divorce, a failed business venture, and nearly his own life, he'd grown disillusioned with the world. To reclaim his perspective, he'd decided to strip away his wealth and privilege, living among societies forgotten, to see if anyone would truly care. Most people passed him by without a second glance, but Laura had stopped. She'd seen him, not just the man in rags, but the person beneath. Her compassion had reignited something in Daniel that he thought long extinguished. Hope. Hope that humanity wasn't beyond redemption, that even in its darkest corners, light could still shine. And now, watching Laura pour her heart into building the clinic, he felt an unexpected emotion stirring within him, an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Love. One evening, as Daniel sat alone in his penthouse, nursing a glass of whiskey and staring out at the glittering skyline, he made a decision. He couldn't keep hiding behind lies, not when Laura deserved the truth. But revealing his true identity wasn't enough. He needed to prove himself worthy of her trust, and perhaps someday her affection. With renewed determination, Daniel began laying the groundwork for his next move. He hired private investigators to gather information about Laura's project, ensuring she had access to top-tier resources and connections. He attended charity events incognito, listening intently as she spoke passionately about her vision for the clinic. Slowly but surely, he positioned himself to re-enter her life, not as a stranger in disguise, but as himself. Still, doubts plagued him. Would Laura forgive him for his deception? Could she ever see him as more than the man in rags, or worse, as someone who'd manipulated her kindness for his own gain? Only time would tell. For now, Daniel contented himself with knowing one thing for certain. Meeting Laura Bennett had changed him in ways he never anticipated. Whether fate would allow them to cross paths again remained uncertain, but one thing was clear: his journey was far from over. Laura's life began to change in ways she could never have imagined. With the $50,000 check safely deposited into a new bank account dedicated solely to her dream project, she threw herself into making the clinic a reality. The money allowed her to rent a small but functional space in a neighborhood that desperately needed healthcare services. It wasn't glamorous, just an old storefront with peeling paint and creaky floors, but it was a start. Every day after her shift at St. Mary's Hospital, Laura worked tirelessly on the clinic. She scrubbed walls, painted rooms, and arranged donated furniture until everything looked clean and welcoming. Friends and colleagues pitched in when they could, bringing supplies or offering their expertise. Even Mrs. Peterson, her elderly neighbor, knitted blankets for the waiting area, saying, "If you're going to help folks, they should feel cozy while they wait." Despite the long hours and physical exhaustion, Laura felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. For the first time, she was building something entirely her own, something that would make a real difference in people's lives. Every obstacle she faced only fueled her determination. When the plumbing stopped working, she called a plumber who offered a discount after hearing about her mission. When the electrical wiring proved faulty, a volunteer electrician stepped in to fix it for free. Slowly but surely, the clinic began to take shape. Word spread quickly through the community about Laura's efforts. People started showing up even before the clinic officially opened, asking if they could donate clothes, food, or medicine. Some offered to volunteer their time as receptionists or translators. Others simply came by to thank Laura for what she was doing. These small acts of support reminded her why she had embarked on this journey in the first place. But not everything was smooth sailing. As the opening date approached, Laura faced challenges that tested her resolve. One afternoon, while sorting through boxes of medical supplies, she discovered that some of the items were expired or unusable. Frustrated, she sat down on the floor, tears welling up in her eyes. She had poured so much of herself into this project, and setbacks like these made her question whether she was cut out for such a monumental task. Just then, her phone buzzed with a text message from Mia, the barista at the cafe where she'd met Daniel. "Hey, stranger. Haven't seen you around lately. How's the clinic coming along? Laura hesitated before replying. She didn't want to burden anyone with her problems, but something about Mia's cheerful tone made her open up. After typing out a brief summary of her struggles, she added, "I guess I just needed to vent. Thanks for listening." Mia responded almost immediately. "You've got this, Laura. You're one of the strongest people I know. If anyone can pull this off, it's you." Her words lifted Laura's spirits, reminding her that she wasn't alone. Determined to push forward, she spent the rest of the evening organizing the usable supplies and making a list of what still needed to be replaced. By the time she locked up the clinic that night, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Unbeknownst to Laura, Daniel Harper was keeping close tabs on her progress. From his penthouse high above the city, he watched news clips about her upcoming clinic and read articles praising her dedication. His private investigators provided regular updates, detailing how she juggled her hospital job with the demands of setting up the clinic. Each report filled him with admiration and guilt. Daniel knew he couldn't stay hidden forever. Watching Laura work so hard, pouring her heart into the project he'd unknowingly inspired, only deepened his feelings for her. He admired her resilience, her unwavering belief in helping others, and her ability to inspire those around her. Yet every time he considered revealing himself, doubt crept in. What if she rejected him? What if she saw him as nothing more than a fraud who had manipulated her kindness? One evening, unable to shake these thoughts, Daniel attended a charity gala hosted by a local nonprofit organization. The event was held in a grand ballroom decorated with glittering chandeliers and elegant, floral arrangements. Guests mingled over champagne and hors d'oeuvres, discussing philanthropy and social causes. Daniel stood near the back of the room, nursing a glass of wine when he spotted Laura across the hall. She looked radiant in a simple navy blue dress, her hair pulled back neatly, her face glowing with quiet confidence. As she spoke to a group of donors about her clinic, Daniel marveled at how effortlessly she commanded attention. Her passion was infectious, drawing people in and leaving them eager to contribute to her cause. When Laura finished speaking, several attendees approached her to express their support. Daniel hung back, torn between joining them and slipping away unnoticed. Finally summoning his courage, he stepped forward and introduced himself as Mr. Harper, a potential donor interested in supporting her work. "Ms. Bennett," he said smoothly, extending his hand. "Your speech was inspiring. I'd love to learn more about your clinic." Laura shook his hand, smiling politely. "Thank you, Mr. Harper. It's always encouraging to meet someone who shares our vision." They talked for a few minutes, exchanging pleasantries and discussing the clinic's goals. Daniel listened intently, careful not to reveal too much about himself. But as their conversation continued, he found himself dropping subtle hints about their past encounter. The rainy night in the alley, the cafe where they'd shared dinner, the check he'd given her. At first, Laura didn't seem to notice. Then, midway through their discussion, her expression shifted. Her brow furrowed slightly and she tilted her head, studying him closely. "Wait a minute," she said slowly. Do I know you from somewhere?" Daniel's heart raced. This was the moment of truth. He smiled faintly, choosing his words carefully. "Let's just say we've crossed paths before, though perhaps under different circumstances." Realization dawned on Laura's face, and she gasped softly. "Daniel, is that you?" He nodded, his smile widening. "In the flesh. Though I suppose in the suit might be more accurate now." For a moment, Laura was speechless. She stared at him, taking in his polished appearance, the tailored jacket, the crisp shirt, the confident demeanor. Gone was the man in rags she'd met weeks ago. In his place stood someone who seemed almost unrecognizable. "I don't understand," she finally managed to say. "What's going on? Who are you, really?" Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's a long story, Laura. One I owe you an explanation for, but not here. Can we talk somewhere quieter?" Laura hesitated, unsure whether to trust him. Part of her wanted to walk away, to dismiss him as someone who had played games with her emotions. But another part, a deeper, instinctive part, told her there was more to his story. Reluctantly, she agreed to meet him outside the venue. The cool night air helped clear Laura's head as she followed Daniel to a quiet corner of the parking lot. Streetlights cast soft pools of light onto the pavement, creating an intimate atmosphere despite the bustling city around them. "All right," Laura said firmly, crossing her arms. "Explain yourself. Who are you, and why did you lie to me?" Daniel took a deep breath, bracing himself for her reaction. "My name is Daniel Harper, and I'm the CEO of Harper Tech Industries. A few months ago, I decided to step away from my life temporarily, to live among people struggling to survive, to see if anyone would show me kindness without expecting anything in return. That's how we met." Laura's jaw dropped. "You're a millionaire? And you pretended to be homeless? Why?" "To test humanity," Daniel admitted quietly. "After losing everything once before, I became cynical. I wanted to believe there was still goodness in the world, but I needed proof. Meeting you, that night in the alley, it changed me, Laura. Your compassion reminded me of what truly matters." Laura shook her head, struggling to process what she was hearing. "So everything, the check, the money for the clinic, it all came from you? Why didn't you just tell me the truth from the beginning?" "I wanted to earn your trust honestly," Daniel replied earnestly. "But I also knew you wouldn't accept help from someone like me, not after seeing me as, well, as I was. I thought it would be easier this way." "Easier?" Laura echoed incredulously. "Do you have any idea how confused I've been? How many nights I lay awake wondering who you really were?" "I'm sorry," Daniel said sincerely. "I never meant to hurt you. All I wanted was to give back, to repay the kindness you showed me." Laura studied him for a long moment, searching his eyes for sincerity. Despite her frustration, she couldn't deny the truth in his words. Whether he had deceived her or not, his actions had sparked something incredible. Because of him, she was closer than ever to achieving her dream. Finally, she let out a slow breath and nodded. "Okay, I believe you, but this doesn't mean I forgive you completely. You have a lot to make up for, Daniel." A flicker of relief crossed his face. "I understand, and I'll spend however long it takes proving myself to you." As they stood there in the quiet parking lot, surrounded by the hum of distant traffic, Laura realized something important. No matter how angry or betrayed she felt, Daniel's intentions had ultimately led to something good. His deception might have been misguided, but his desire to help others was genuine. Perhaps in time, she could learn to trust him again. And maybe, just maybe, there was room in her heart for forgiveness. Little did either of them know, their journey together was only beginning. The days following their conversation in the parking lot were a whirlwind of emotions for Laura. She couldn't stop thinking about Daniel, his confession, his reasons for disguising himself, and the overwhelming guilt she felt for having judged him so harshly at first. But more than anything, she was confused. How could someone who had everything willingly give it all up to live on the streets? And why had he chosen her, of all people, to test his faith in humanity? Despite her lingering doubts, Laura found herself softening toward Daniel. He reached out to her regularly, sending texts and emails to check on her progress with the clinic. Each message was polite and considerate, never pushing too hard or expecting an immediate response. It was clear he was trying to rebuild her trust, one small step at a time. One evening, as Laura sat at her kitchen table reviewing invoices for the clinic, her phone buzzed with another message from Daniel. This time, however, it wasn't just a casual update. "Laura," the text read, "I'd like to visit the clinic tomorrow if that's okay. I want to see firsthand what you've built." Her fingers hovered over the screen as she considered his request. Part of her wanted to say no, to keep him at arm's length until she fully understood his intentions. But another part of her knew that shutting him out wouldn't help either of them. If Daniel truly wanted to make amends, she owed it to both of them to let him try. She typed back a simple reply. "Sure, come by after lunch." The next afternoon, Daniel arrived at the clinic precisely on time, dressed casually but neatly in jeans and a button-down shirt. Laura greeted him with a polite smile, leading him inside without much fanfare. The space had transformed dramatically since its early days as a dusty old storefront. Bright paint covered the walls, medical equipment gleamed under fluorescent lights, and cheerful posters about health and wellness lined the hallways. "This is incredible," Daniel said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "You've done so much with the space." "Thanks," Laura replied, keeping her tone neutral. "It's been a team effort. A lot of people have helped along the way." As they walked through the rooms, Daniel asked thoughtful questions about the clinic's operations and the services it planned to offer. He seemed genuinely interested, jotting down notes and offering suggestions based on his business experience. Laura couldn't deny that his insights were valuable, but she remained guarded, unsure whether to fully embrace his involvement. After the tour, they sat down in her makeshift office, a tiny room barely big enough for a desk and 2 chairs. Daniel leaned forward, his expression serious. "Laura, I know I messed up. I lied to you and I hurt your trust. But I want to make things right. Let me help you. Not just financially, but however you need. Whether it's finding volunteers, securing grants, or even handling paperwork, I'm here." His words caught her off guard. For weeks, she had assumed Daniel's interest in the clinic stemmed from guilt or obligation. Now, hearing him speak with such sincerity, she began to wonder if there was more to his motivations. Could it be possible that he truly cared about her work and about her? "I appreciate the offer," Laura said cautiously, "but I don't want you to feel like you have to do this. You already gave me the money to get started. That's more than enough." "It's not about feeling obligated," Daniel countered, quickly. "It's about wanting to be part of something meaningful. What you're doing here, it's important, and I want to support it because I believe in you." His admission hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken emotion. Laura looked away, unsure how to respond. She had spent so long focusing on her own goals and dreams that she hadn't allowed herself to consider the possibility of letting someone else share in them. Especially someone like Daniel. Before she could reply, her phone buzzed with an urgent call from one of the volunteers. Excusing herself, she stepped outside to take the call, leaving Daniel alone in the office. As he waited, he glanced around the room, noticing a corkboard covered in photos, sticky notes, and inspirational quotes. One picture in particular caught his eye, a candid shot of Laura laughing with a group of children during a community event. Her joy was infectious, radiating from the image like sunlight. When Laura returned a few minutes later, she found Daniel still staring at the photo. "Those kids mean a lot to me," she explained softly. "They remind me why I started this whole thing in the first place." Daniel nodded, his gaze softening. "You inspire people, Laura. You always have, even when you don't realize it." His words sent a shiver down her spine. For the first time since meeting him, she allowed herself to entertain the idea that maybe, just maybe, Daniel wasn't just trying to fix his mistakes. Maybe he genuinely cared about her, flaws and all. Over the next few weeks, Daniel became a regular presence at the clinic. At first, his visits were brief and practical, focused on helping Laura streamline logistics or brainstorm fundraising ideas. But gradually, their interactions grew more personal. They shared meals together after long days of work, talking about their childhoods, their dreams, and the moments that had shaped them into who they were today. Through these conversations, Laura learned that Daniel's decision to live on the streets hadn't been impulsive. After losing his company in a bitter legal battle years earlier, he had spiraled into depression, isolating himself from friends and family. It wasn't until he hit rock bottom that he realized how disconnected he had become, not just from others, but from himself. His experiment had been born out of desperation, a last-ditch effort to reconnect with the world. Hearing his story made Laura see him in a new light. Beneath his polished exterior lay a man haunted by regret, searching for redemption in a world that often felt cold and unforgiving. In many ways, they weren't so different. Two people driven by a desire to make a difference even if their methods sometimes clashed. One evening, as they worked late preparing for the clinic's grand opening, Daniel surprised Laura with an unexpected question. "Do you ever think about the future?" he asked, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "What do you mean?" she replied, glancing up from the stack of flyers she was organizing. "I mean, beyond the clinic. Do you ever imagine settling down someday? Having a family? Building a life with someone?" Laura hesitated, caught off guard by the intimacy of his question. "I used to," she admitted quietly. "But then life got busy and I guess I stopped thinking about it. Why do you ask?" Daniel smiled faintly, his eyes locking onto hers. "Because I can't stop thinking about it. About us." His confession left Laura speechless. She had suspected there might be feelings between them, but hearing him say it aloud made her heart race. Before she could respond, Daniel continued, his voice trembling slightly. "I know I don't deserve a second chance, Laura. I know I hurt you, and I'll spend the rest of my life making up for that if I have to. But I also know that I've never met anyone like you. You challenge me, inspire me, and make me want to be better, and I can't imagine walking away from that. Not now. Not ever." Tears welled up in Laura's eyes as she processed his words. For so long she had guarded her heart, afraid of letting anyone get too close. But Daniel's vulnerability broke through her defenses, reminding her of the power of forgiveness and love. "I'm scared," she whispered finally. "Scared of getting hurt again. Scared of trusting the wrong person." "I understand," Daniel said gently. "And I won't rush you. But please just give me a chance to prove myself, to show you that I'm worth taking a risk on." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then slowly, Laura reached out and took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "Okay," she murmured. "Let's take it one day at a time." Relief washed over Daniel's face, followed by a grin so wide it lit up the entire room. For the first time in months, he felt hopeful. Not just about their relationship, but about the future they could build together. The night before the clinic's grand opening, Laura stood alone in the empty waiting area, gazing out the window at the city skyline. So much had changed in such a short amount of time. From the rainy night she'd met Daniel to the bustling clinic she now called home, her life had taken turns she never could have predicted. As she reflected on everything she'd overcome, a familiar voice broke the silence. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Turning, she saw Daniel standing in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one, his smile warm and inviting. "Couldn't sleep," he explained. "Figured you might be awake too." Laura accepted the coffee gratefully, savoring its warmth. "Just thinking about how far we've come," she admitted. "Both of us." Daniel nodded, leaning against the wall beside her. "We've still got a long way to go, but I think we're heading in the right direction." Laura glanced at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew they would face them together. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt ready to embrace whatever came next. The morning of the clinic's grand opening dawned bright and clear, with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel fresh and full of promise. Laura woke early, her nerves buzzing like a live wire. Today was the culmination of months of hard work, sacrifice, and determination. It was also a day she had once thought impossible, a day when her dream would finally become reality. As she dressed in a simple yet elegant outfit, Laura couldn't help but think about how far she'd come since that rainy night in the alley. Back then, she had been just another overworked nurse struggling to keep her head above water. Now she stood on the brink of something extraordinary, a free clinic that would serve hundreds, maybe even thousands of people who otherwise wouldn't have access to health care. And standing beside her, though still navigating the fragile terrain of their relationship, was Daniel Harper. Daniel arrived at the clinic an hour before the official opening, carrying a bouquet of sunflowers wrapped in brown paper. "For you," he said softly, handing them to Laura with a shy smile. "To celebrate." Laura accepted the flowers, touched by the gesture. Thank you, she murmured, inhaling their sweet scent. They're beautiful. You deserve it, Daniel replied earnestly. This place is amazing, Laura. You should be proud. I am, she admitted, glancing around the bustling space. Volunteers scurried about, arranging chairs and tables, while others hung banners and balloons. The waiting area gleamed under freshly polished floors, and the exam rooms were stocked and ready for patients. Everything looked perfect, or as close to perfect as it could get. As the clock ticked closer to noon, guests began arriving in droves. Local politicians, community leaders, and curious neighbors filled the clinic, eager to see what Laura had created. Reporters snapped photos, jotting down notes as Laura gave interviews, explaining her vision for the clinic and thanking everyone who had helped make it possible. Through it all, Daniel stayed close, offering quiet support whenever she needed it. When the ribbon-cutting ceremony finally began, Laura stepped up to the microphone, her heart pounding in her chest. She scanned the crowd, taking in the sea of faces watching her expectantly. For a moment, she felt overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. Then, catching Daniel's eye, she drew strength from his steady gaze and began to speak. Thank you all for being here today, she started, her voice trembling slightly but growing stronger with each word. This clinic represents more than just a building or a service. It represents hope. Hope for those who feel forgotten, for those who struggle to afford basic care, and for those who simply need someone to believe in them. She paused, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I didn't do this alone. So many incredible people came together to make this happen. From the volunteers who worked tirelessly to the donors who believed in our mission. And most importantly, I want to thank my family, friends, and someone very special who reminded me that kindness can change lives. Her gaze lingered on Daniel for a split second longer than necessary, drawing knowing smiles from the crowd. Clearing her throat, she continued, Today isn't just about opening doors, it's about opening hearts. Together we can create a world where no one has to suffer because they can't afford help. Applause erupted as Laura stepped back, allowing the mayor to step forward and cut the ceremonial ribbon. As cheers echoed through the room, Laura felt a wave of relief wash over her. It was done. Her dream was alive. After the ceremony, guests mingled inside the clinic, touring the facilities and chatting with staff members. Laura moved through the crowd, shaking hands and accepting congratulations, until she found herself face to face with Daniel near the entrance. You did it, he said proudly, his eyes shining with admiration. You really pulled it off. We did it, Laura corrected gently, smiling up at him. None of this would have been possible without your support. Daniel shook his head modestly. I only gave you a push. The rest was all you. Before Laura could respond, a young boy tugged at her sleeve, holding out a handmade card. Thank you, Miss Laura, he said shyly. My mom says you're going to help us feel better. Tears pricked at Laura's eyes as she knelt down to hug him. That's right, she whispered. That's exactly what we're here for. Watching the exchange, Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat. Laura's compassion wasn't just a trait, it was who she was at her core. In that moment, he realized how lucky he was to have found her, and how much he wanted to spend the rest of his life making her happy. Later that evening, after the crowds had dispersed and the cleanup was underway, Daniel approached Laura as she stood outside the clinic, gazing up at the sign above the door. Harper Bennett Wellness Center. He had insisted on adding her name to it, saying it was only fair since she was the heart and soul of the project. It looks good, Daniel remarked, joining her under the soft glow of the streetlights. Your legacy. Our legacy, Laura corrected again, nudging him playfully. Don't sell yourself short. Daniel chuckled, but his expression quickly turned serious. Laura, there's something I need to say. She turned to face him, sensing the gravity in his tone. What is it? Taking a deep breath, Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Dropping to one knee, he opened it, to reveal a delicate diamond ring nestled inside. Gasping, Laura covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes widening in shock. Laura Bennett, Daniel began, his voice steady despite the emotion swirling within him. From the moment I met you, you've inspired me to be a better person. You showed me that kindness isn't weakness, it's strength. And now, standing here with you, I know I've never loved anyone the way I love you. Will you marry me? Time seemed to stand still as Laura processed his words. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she nodded vigorously, unable to form coherent sentences. Yes, she choked out finally, throwing her arms around him. 1,000 times yes. Cheers erupted from behind them as nearby volunteers and staff, members, who had obviously been eavesdropping, burst into applause. Daniel slipped the ring onto Laura's finger, pulling her into a tight embrace. For the first time in years, he felt truly whole. In the weeks that followed, Laura and Daniel threw themselves into planning not just their wedding but also the future of the clinic. With Daniel's resources and connections, they expanded its services, hiring additional doctors and nurses and securing funding for long-term sustainability. Together they traveled to conferences and workshops, sharing their story and encouraging others to pursue similar projects in underserved communities. Through it all, their bond only grew stronger. Laura taught Daniel the value of humility and empathy, while Daniel introduced her to new ways of thinking about leadership and innovation. They balanced each other perfectly, blending their strengths to create something greater than either could achieve alone. On their wedding day, a sunny, spring afternoon, they exchanged vows surrounded by friends, family, and the countless lives they had touched through their work. As they danced under twinkling fairy lights, Laura leaned her head against Daniel's shoulder, feeling utterly content. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't stopped that night?" she asked softly. Daniel smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Every day. But I'm glad you did. You saved me, Laura, in more ways than one." Laura squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with gratitude. We saved each other, and as they gazed out at the stars, hand in hand, they knew their journey was just beginning. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, with love, kindness, and unwavering faith in the power of humanity.